There are some therapists in this world or mental health professionals who don't understand the value of an autism or ADHD diagnosis or label. I've heard horror stories and I've experienced at least one of my own in which I've seen a practitioner or somebody's seen a practitioner and they've conveyed their desire for a diagnosis or they've used the label, and the therapist who is not, or the practitioner who is not neuroaffirming, has been dismissive and has kind of dismissed it out of hand and implied that, well, I don't do labels, I don't find labels helpful, which is kind of ironic since this profession is predicated upon the use of the DSM to provide services and to provide diagnoses. And some people are going to have their own standpoint in terms of like whether that's helpful and whether it's pathologizing, and it's not helpful to necessarily confine somebody to a diagnostic box. And there are arguments both ways. But for neurodivergence, it is an identity, less so than it is a diagnosis. Yes, it qualifies as a diagnosis to be autistic and ADHD. And there are associated challenges that come with that, often pretty substantial: motor skills differences, sensory differences, executive function challenges, difficulties in social environments, and then all the co-occurring challenges like generalized anxiety or depression, just as a kind of quick summary, but the problems are myriad. So we don't want to delegitimize the real life struggles that people have when they are neurodivergent, but we also don't want to confine people to a box. That said, if you as a neurodivergent person is going to a mental health professional and you're asking for a diagnosis or you're pursuing legitimizing or validation of your lived experience, that's what it is a lot of the times, because we go through this world without people actually recognizing the source of our difference, and often we don't even recognize it ourselves, especially if we didn't receive an early diagnosis and it was later in life that we came to it. And we want people to see us for the first time for who and what we are, rather than slapping these unhelpful labels like lazy, insensitive, rude, disruptive, whatever the labels, negative labels that are assigned to us when we don't have a diagnosis, that are value judgments based on other people's perceptions of our outward behaviors and not our inward struggles. We often go into the world as a result feeling very inferior and defective. And so getting an autism or ADHD diagnosis can be really empowering. It can be like, finally, I have a label for why I've struggled. I have a rationalization, an explanation, not an excuse for things that I might have done that might have hurt people, for example, but an understanding, a new understanding about who you are, why you've struggled, and how you can also overcome or at least mitigate some of those challenges. So to go and see a mental health practitioner and have them kind of brush you off is really invalidating. For them to say, oh, I just don't do labels, I don't find them helpful. It's like, well, great that works for you, but that doesn't necessarily work for everybody, especially when it's a core part of our identity, which I believe the autism and ADHD neurotypes are a core part of our identity. If you strip away the dysfunction, we still think, behave, and communicate in unique ways that veer away from the neurotypical norms. And I think those are perfectly legitimate. They just don't always vibe well with the neurotypical expectations, for example, in social environments. But it's perfectly legitimate that we think, feel, and behave, communicate in our own unique way. And so having a mental health professional who is credentialed and hopefully qualified to provide those diagnoses can be like a light coming on in a very dark room in which you've been fumbling most of your life. You finally have recognition and validity, and you have somebody who can also kind of help you through this process, hopefully, and invalidating and normalizing your experience and helping you wrap your head around why you've struggled a lot of your life, because otherwise nobody else does. Who is going to go out of their way to identify this with you and have the knowledge and hopefully the experience to guide you through that diagnosis or understanding the challenges associated with it and mutually problem solving? Like, that is the designated person that we often go to for that diagnosis and for the legitimization of our experiences. So to have a mental health professional have a kind of bog standard response to you asking for that, it just feels like this person is being grossly insensitive and isn't very neuroinformed, as I mentioned, doesn't understand the challenges that we have to navigate as undiagnosed neurodivergents. And it seems like it's more for them than it is for us. For them, like, well, I'm just taking this standpoint on diagnoses. And that can be all well and good if it's not a neurotype. Like, you can be like, well, I don't want to confine you to this diagnosis of this label or that label. I want to see you as a fully dimensional human being. I can understand that. But you can't say that with a neurotype like autism or ADHD, because that is the full dimension. Well, that is a core part of the full dimensions of the human being, of the neurodivergent person. And as a result of these experiences, many people end up falling out of faith with the profession as a whole. They might start believing that it's a pointless effort. Why should I even open up to somebody? Why should I be vulnerable? Why should I ask for help if the door is going to close in my face, which is the experience that's often universal for many neurodivergents navigating the world and asking for help, especially when they don't have a diagnosis, is they ask for help and people don't understand why they're asking for help, and people aren't even equipped or necessarily compassionate or empathic enough to provide that help, that accommodation, that understanding, that empathy. And so it's a repeat of very negative experiences, help-seeking behavior, help-seeking related experiences, and it conveys to the neurodivergent that it's futile. Why even try? I should just not even reach out, and I should just struggle on my own. And it does the mental health professional a disservice because they don't actually learn from that experience, because often what we'll do as neurodivergents is just pull away, not want to engage furthermore. And then the neurodivergent doesn't get the support that they're reaching out for, and they're probably burnt as a result and don't feel like they actually want to ask for help again because the door's going to close in their face. They might encounter an equally insensitive or uninformed person who's going to have this bog standard response about, I just don't do diagnoses, I'm not into labels, I don't find them helpful. Granted, some mental health professionals cannot provide the screening and the diagnoses for these neurotypes, and that can be understandable, but that doesn't mean they can't validate somebody's perception that they might be neurodivergent or their experiences associated with it. They might not be able to say, I can't definitively diagnose you, but I can say, hey, I hear you, I see you, I feel you, and I believe you, right? I believe you. That's what we all seek when we ask for help, especially mental health professionals. We need somebody to say, I believe you and I see you. What you've experienced, I have full faith that what you're conveying to me has been the experience that you've lived. And we don't get that a lot of the times. People out in the world don't see us for who we are or why we are, and don't have that empathy and compassion. They just slap these unhelpful labels, and they diminish us, and they demean us, and they ostracize us. So this is why it's so crucial that helping professionals be neuroinformed and understand the validity of wanting a diagnosis, of wanting to finally be seen for the first time in somebody's life, and for their struggles to be validated. Have you had an experience like this working with somebody where you opened up to them about your diagnosis or your desire to seek a diagnosis or your perceptions of being neurodivergent and had them kind of brush it off? A lot of people I find often have microaggression-y responses like, oh, you seem normal, you don't seem autistic, you seem to be fine, some version of that. And has it shut you down? Has it made you feel like you don't want to go and seek help, that people aren't worthy of trust, that you shouldn't invest this effort in somebody and trying to explain to them why you're struggling? I would love to hear all about your experiences.